Welcome to meeting number 34 of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to Section 1083F of the Standing Order and the motion adopted on April 21st, 2026, today we meet to study the draft regulation on the use of French in private sector businesses under federal jurisdiction. I would like to welcome our witnesses. As an individual, Gianluca Campofedano, lawyer. Did I pronounce your name well? Thank you very much. And from the Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick, we have Nicole Arsenault-Sleuter, Chair, welcome, and Ali Chaisson, Director General, appearing online. Welcome. Each group will have 5 minutes for their opening statements, after which we will proceed to a question and answer period with the members of the committee. So, Mr. Campofedano, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Hello. I would like to introduce myself. I'd like to thank everyone who are part of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Thank you for having me today for this testimony. I am Gianluca Campofedano. I am a lawyer and member of the Quebec Bar since 2017. I co-founded the Boa Vista Legal Services law firm, a multidisciplinary law firm in Montreal in 2020. In 2022, my firm collaborated with Professor Guillaume Rousseau, a specialist in language rights in Quebec, as part of a project funded by l'Office québécois de la langue française, the OQLF. This project led us to produce guides, informational briefs, and educational material on language rights published by the University of Sherbrooke's Legal Clinic. As part of this project, we also created presentations, practical guides, and led several workshops on labor law and commercial law and its relationship with language law in Quebec. This content is available through the CAGE and the SOQUIJ. And we also provided these workshops in other settings, such as within universities. We also contributed to the update of Professor Rousseau's book, Le droit linguistique au Québec, so Quebec language laws, about language at work. In my professional practice, I also provide legal education on language rights to the general public, and I continue to provide workshops on language laws when SOQUIJ or CAGE asks me to do so. I learn about the use of French in private businesses under federal jurisdiction, as well as the Act on the use of French in federally regulated businesses. And I wish to contribute through my expertise to the discussion surrounding this regulation, particularly regarding the integration of the protections provided by Bill 96 and the latest version of the Charter of the French language. I believe that protecting and promoting French requires clear legislative action, particularly with regards to the businesses under federal jurisdiction. They play a significant role in Quebec and employ a lot of people. It is essential to regulate French language on 2 levels. First, internal communications between the employer and employees, and second, external communications with the public, particularly when it comes to customer service and advertising, especially on social media. I believe that any legislative action should be closely guided by the Charter of the French language as reinforced by Bill 96 in 2022 in order to respect its spirit and objectives. Such an approach would ensure legal consistency and avoid any uncertainty that could undermine the right to work and be served in French. On the ground, we are seeing more English being used, especially amongst young people and in downtown Montreal. Within our firm, we have chosen to operate exclusively in French, both in our communications and in our online presence, whether that's on social media or our website, in order to concretely promote French. The appeal of English remains strong, and without concrete and structural measures, French may continue to decline. The federal government must therefore lead by example and align itself with the efforts made by the government of Quebec. Otherwise, there is a real risk of seeing two distinct parallel language regimes, which would further weaken the position of French. We support this regulation as it ensures an equivalent level of protection that is provided by the Charter of the French language. It would also be desirable to explicitly recognize the right to work in French as a fundamental right. As per Section 4 of the Charter of the French language. And unlike the general principles currently set out in the Act and the draft regulation, the Charter of the French language provides concrete mechanisms regarding the language of work, particularly with regards to recruitment, protection against linguistic discrimination, and my apologies, I'm sorry for interrupting. Your time is up, so I would ask you to quickly wrap up, and I'm sure that during the question and answer period, you will be able to share more information. Sorry, I did not see time go by. I would just like to thank Professor Guillaume Brousseau and members of the committee for their initiative, as well as Mr. Mario Beaulieu for his invitation. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of my colleagues Evan Bourgault and Sophia Toutan for their contribution. Thank you very much. I will now hand the floor to Ms. Arsenault-Sluyter for 5 minutes. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. The SANB and myself, I am an Acadian who lives in St. John, New Brunswick, and I've lived there for 40 years. It's a city that is mostly Anglophone. Living in French there is not something you can take for granted. It's a conscious choice that we take and make every morning with pride and determination. I know this reality firsthand. The reality of needing to defend my language through daily actions, of looking for services in French. And I speak before you on behalf of the many Acadians and Francophones who make the same choice every day despite the challenges. During the study of C13, parliamentarians and stakeholders focused their efforts on Part 7 of the Official Languages Act, and rightly so. However, this bill also led to the creation of a second law, the Use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act, which can also make a concrete contribution to stopping the decline of French in Canada. For the SNB, this act raised a fundamental question. How should the phrase significant Francophone presence be interpreted in the context of New Brunswick? Following the presentation of the draft regulation, the SNB welcomes the proposal to apply this act to the entirety of New Brunswick. This is good news in keeping with the very spirit of the act. The preamble of this act recognizes that the federal government is committed to protecting and promoting French, recognizing that this language is in a minority situation in Canada and in North America. New Brunswick is not like any other province. It is the only province that's officially bilingual in Canada, as explicitly recognized in Sections 16.2 and 16.1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This section guarantees the equal status of both linguistic communities. Since 2023, the Modernized Official Languages Act has also recognized this unique linguistic regime. This constitutional specificity is not just a detail. It is the foundation upon which all concrete action in support of French in New Brunswick rests. If it's merely symbolic, then it fails. It must trigger concrete actions that protect and strengthens bilingualism. The demographic context is extremely concerning. Rural exodus is hitting the province hard. Francophone communities in the north are losing people, whereas the south, which is mostly Anglophone, is experiencing sustained growth. In this context, applying the Act to the entire province can have two concrete effects. One, it promotes the creation of well-paid French language jobs in Francophone regions, thereby helping to retain the population where the roots are deeply embedded. And two, it guarantees access to French language services across the province, including in regions that mostly speak English, thereby allowing Francophones to fully live in their language every day. The SNB believes that these two effects can positively contribute to reversing this demographic trend. For Francophones like me, this measure is a ray of hope, knowing that my region will be able to provide more services and jobs in French in private businesses under federal jurisdiction is a concrete step towards a better linguistic balance. It is in this context that St. John becomes a symbol of what Francophones in minority situations experience. We are on the front lines of this struggle. The survival of our language is declining in cities and in workplaces, and laws such as this one reinforces this survival, for which we have continued to fight for over 52 years at the SAND. And I invite you to go further. Take concrete measures that will allow the Canadian Francophonie to not only survive, but also to thrive. This is not a constraint, it's a treasure. It is a strength for all of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Arsenault-Slaughter. We will now move to members' questions, starting with Mr. Godin, 6 minutes. Before starting the timer, Mr. Chair, I would like to share with you the fact that I'm proud to wear the lapo that I have. It's an item to show my solidarity towards you and towards your people, the Ukrainian people, as part of their national day. This is the Vyshyvanka. I just want to take a quick moment to highlight this. Thank you. Ms. Arsenault-Slater. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank Mr. Campo-Fredano as well for your opening remarks. I would like to start by asking a question to Ms. Arsenault-Slater from the SANB. After having listened to your opening statement, I assume that you are satisfied with the draft regulations under the use of French in private businesses. Do you think there are things that we may be able to add in order to strengthen it and to allow French to thrive across Canada, either to you or Mr. Chaisson, who is appearing online? And I'd like to say hi to him as well.
There's a great deal we need to do in New Brunswick and my region, in Saint-Jean, for us to become a bilingual province. We still have a great deal of work to do. We believe it would be a very good thing if all customer services did provide service in French across the entire province. You mean to consumers? Yes. Yes, that's important. Mr. Chiasson, Ms. Arsenault-Slaughter, there is an exception in the regulations, sections 18 and 19, where New Brunswick is not obliged to provide information. It's in 18B. And in 19.1, at points of service, there is an exception for New Brunswick. So how does that improve and highlight the presence of French in New Brunswick? Is this an advantage or something that's inconvenient? It should be an advantage. Theoretically, the issue of providing people for customer service, and a bank, for example, who can speak French will only improve the vitality of a community. I've experienced being the francophone, the token francophone, and if there's some kind of emergency, everybody people do everything they can to help a francophone who's desperately trying to get served in French. So in those circumstances, Chair, through you, it would be good to take account of how things really are. Official languages should be changed from being a burden to being an opportunity. We've been investing in bilingualism for 50 years. We invest in learning French through immersion programs. And we often see that those students, after 15 years in their professions, don't speak French anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chasson. My apologies for interrupting you. But you believe this would not be a disadvantage. I think we would have every advantage in obliging federally regulated businesses to publish. We are full of goodwill around this table, but sometimes people are trying to conceal what they're doing and not draw attention on themselves. I know time is short. I have a question for Mr. Campofredano. Mr. Campofredano, in your opening statement, you said that you wanted both statutes to be equivalent. In your view, when you read both statutes, are they indeed equivalent? Well, obviously, the Charter of the French language focuses on promoting French. Well, let's just talk about Quebec for now. We had proposed making sure that federally regulated businesses operating in Quebec come under the jurisdiction of Quebec's French language charter, but unfortunately we were unable to get that included in the legislation under the agreement between the government of Quebec and the then Liberal government. So would it not have been more efficient, more effective and easier to leave Quebec with full responsibility for the Quebec Charter of the French language? We have the knowledge we need, and what we've ended up now are gray areas. I apologize, Mr. Godin. There are only 5 or 10 seconds left. Please, a quick answer, Mr. Campofredano. I completely agree with Mr. Godin's suggestion, because the French language charter is more complete and actually has more teeth, so I would agree with that. Mr. Duchesne-Thériault, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. My question is for the SANB. As you said, the regulations governing French in federally regulated businesses will apply across New Brunswick. As an Acadian, I share your enthusiasm about this excellent news. So why is it important for the regulations to apply to all of the New Brunswick and not just some of its regions? Well, as you know, the more English is spoken, the more English gets spoken, and the same applies to French. The more French you speak, the more we hear French being spoken. In Saint-Jean, it's really difficult to hear French when you walk into a store. When our children are in schools, in an immersion school or in a linguistic minority schools, we cannot get service in French. It's just not there, and that contributes even more to the assimilation that we're feeling. The census is coming up, and what's happening in New Brunswick is really concerning. So in my view, this measure is extremely positive and will improve the situation and slow down assimilation. And I'd also like to hear your view on how these regulations will help advance the vitality of Francophone Acadian communities in New Brunswick. Yes, what will it change for them? How will it enhance their vitality? Well, these are our communities, and it's our communities that bring life to La Francophonie in New Brunswick that has to be maintained. For example, a few years ago, I was working for a bank. All documents were in English, mortgage documents and so forth. I think now they've all been translated. I haven't been there in quite a while. But it's important that all those businesses have documents in both English and in French. We do see this in New Brunswick. Quebec is a distinct case, but for the rest of Canada. Could you tell us how New Brunswick is different from other provinces from a linguistic point of view? Well, we have English and French in health and other sectors. French is protected, but not in early childhood education yet, so we still have a lot of work to do there. So the regulations will provide new rights for consumers and so on. Why is it necessary for workers and consumers, Acadian workers and consumers, to exercise their rights to the full under the legislation? Well, these rights need to be promoted because we're so accustomed to being almost assimilated and falling too easily into English. I don't mean regions like La Roquette, of course, but the entire southern part of the province. We don't even have the reflex of speaking French. I think that in New Brunswick, we are somewhat discouraged. It's difficult to keep making the effort, and then everyone is taken aback. It's almost embarrassing to ask to be served in French. The federal government is really going to have to assume its responsibilities and promote these rights so that people know they've got them and use them. Mr. Chasson, do you have anything to add? I think that the federal government needs to put pressure on federally regulated businesses across Canada. It needs to push banks to implement processes that will not only be in compliance with people's language rights, but will also be in compliance with a signage policy. If somebody doesn't know that you have a right to be served in French and then you walk into a bank, nothing's been accomplished. So a lot of implementation and application of these regulations is necessary. The federal government needs to exercise genuine leadership and impose financial penalties if businesses don't fulfill their obligations. Thank you, Ms. Arsenault. We're going to have to make recommendations. We can say that the legislation pass as it stands. Do you recommend that it pass as it stands in its current form? Yes, for New Brunswick, absolutely. Thank you. In conclusion, I'd like to point out that this is the last time Ms. Arsenault will appear as president of the SANB. Her mandate, her term is drawing to a close. I would like to thank her, thank you for everything you've done to defend the interests of Acadian Francophones in New Brunswick. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Deschênes.
Thank you, Mr. Deschênes-Thériault. I think that you clearly see that this sentiment is shared by everyone on the committee. Before we go to the next member, Mr. Chiasson, I have a brief request. If you would kindly bring down your microphone a fraction. Thank you. And the next time you speak, we'll see if that will be better because you weren't loud enough. Thank you. Mr. Beaulieu, 6 minutes. Thank you. And just to conclude the story that my colleague began, for at least 2 decades, the Bloc Québécois has been working to make sure that Bill 101 also applies to federally regulated businesses. Over the years, we've managed to garner support from all opposition parties. And as Mr. Gaudin was saying, there have been talks with the government of Quebec. And there is an agreement to ensure that the Official Languages Act that governs the use of French in federally regulated businesses is closer in substance to the Charter of the French language. But Liberals voted against it. So we've ended up with 2 linguistic regimes in Quebec, and that's somewhat ambiguous. The Commissioner's responsibility as part of her duties is to take measures to ensure the recognition of rights set out in that legislation, but the Minister is responsible for administering that legislation. The regulations do mention the Minister, but do not give any details on what the Official Language Commissioner's role is. Mr. Campo-Fredano, do you have anything to say on whether these provisions in the regulations are ambiguous? Well, yes, what I can say is that we're back with the issue of a federal regime which is responsible for promoting both languages, and the Charter of the French language in Quebec, which is focused on French. Basically, our proposal is fundamentally designed to ensure that Bill 101, the French language charter, has more teeth, is more details, contains more specific provisions on such things as staff recruitment, knowledge of French when an employee is hired. Can you hear me well now? Can you hear me well, Mr. Beaulieu? It's still not that loud, but it's not just you. I think it's the console here that needs to be adjusted. So there are various measures to act as protection for the language, as well as penalties, which I don't see in the draft regulations. They're administrative penalties, targeted ones, that do add teeth. And those exist in the Quebec legislation, but not in the federal statute. And as I said in my opening statement, I believe that the federal government has a great deal of power when it comes to showing and demonstrating that to show it can be done. So if it protects and fosters French in Quebec, that will send a very strong message that protecting French is not just something for provinces or a few provinces to do, but is a more broadly a Canadian mission. And as we were saying, banking communications should be in both languages. Our time is limited. I'm sorry for interrupting, but the Commissioner has tremendous resources. The Office of the Official Languages Commissioner has almost 100 employees, but does not have additional resources for that specific role. So it can't use its new power to impose financial penalties. So it can issue orders, but with no penalties, we don't know what good that will do. And cases might end up in front of the Industrial Relations Board. But that's certainly less efficient than going through the French language charter. About 40% of federally regulated businesses are not registered with the charter, and those businesses will at some point have to be registered. There will be a large number of federally regulated businesses that will all be subject to the federal legislation, and to those who are subject to Bill 101, there'll just be a transfer of provisions from the federal side. If I understand correctly, the Minister of Canadian Heritage is going to authorize a business to come under the Quebec legislation. That could be done through an agreement. In your view, should the regulations be far more comprehensive to provide a framework for the official language commissioner's role? Mr. Beaulieu, we have only 10 seconds left. Mr. Campo-Fredano, a brief answer, please. Yes, if we compare Quebec with other organizations like the Commission for the Language of Work, responsible for applying Bill 101, there could be more resources on the federal side in the Commissioner's office. Yes, thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Colleagues, before we move to the next member, I know that some colleagues had asked for sound levels to be increased. Technicians have already boosted it as much as they can. Two potential solutions. First of all, if you use your earpiece, that does help somewhat because you can amplify the sound that way. The other way is to ask our witnesses appearing virtually to speak a little louder. If you still can't hear, please do use the earpiece. Thank you. Mr. Godin, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. My questions are for Mr. Campo-Fredano. First of all, I'd like your views on the criteria established for regions with a high Francophone presence. These are extremely quantitative criteria, and I'm not sure that when we, the legislative body, wrote or drafted the legislation, that was in fact our intent.
We were talking about more qualitative criteria. I think that you can't just calculate Francophones by number. You also need to think about quality. Can that be an interesting solution in order to grow? Because there are few high-density regions. So I'm just trying to grow things, and I see my colleague from Nova Scotia who said something great back in Tuesday. He said that Halifax is not even a region with strong Francophone presence. Listen, Mr. Godin. I don't have a lot of precise comments for you on that front. How do you assess Francophone presence? Is it the language spoken at work or at home, or the language of origin? I don't think it's a criteria that's applied in the Quebec language law regime, because the Charter of the French language is applied to the entirety of Quebec. I understand that this may be a little bit less within your field of expertise because we're talking about something outside of Quebec, but you are a legal expert. If you add the complexity and define zones, you make things even a bit heavier. And I wonder if it's a good idea to inspire ourselves from what's in part 4 to broaden things. And I wonder whether it's a good idea to just have one group, so bilingual regions in Canada, so that will be a larger portion of the territory, and that will show that the government intends to stop the decline of French and promote both official languages. Absolutely. I support that. I think that having bilingual regions and even if it's just regions with weaker Francophone presence, we should ask ourselves, should this act protect French-speaking people who are in cities in the country that have a heavy Anglophone presence? I think the law can help, and it's an interesting thing to study. There are French schools that are in places that are not covered. So it's quite aberrant. Something's not working. You said earlier that you have a recommendation related to AMPS. Can you elaborate? Yes. In the French language charter and Bill 96, its latest version, I was giving hand signs to the chair. So, in 2022, Bill 96 added the following for potential administrative monetary penalties, and this may be something for the federal government as well. It says that when a business loses its French certificate in Quebec, one of the possible penalties is the possibility of that business being no longer eligible for government subsidies. It may also no longer be eligible for certain public or government contracts. I think that that's something that gives things a bit more teeth, and I think that the draft regulations can draw inspiration from that. I think that this is a good idea, and please be assured I will add that to the report that will be presented, because we need to give ourselves the tools. We need to have more teeth. And we need to precisely show that we want to improve things. Through these regulations, I feel that they're trying to make everyone happy, and then they forget that the main goal is to ensure that consumers will be able to have access to French and that employees can work in French. Mr. Chair, I see that my time is up, so thank you very much. Over to Ms. Chenette, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses as well. I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Arsenault-Slater, for all your contributions. I understand the struggle of the past few years, but I would like to start by asking this. Don't we have amazing opportunities in front of us? French is the 4th most spoken language in the world. It's also the 4th language that's the most present on the internet. There are a lot of young people who want to speak French, whereas in the past we had to fight for it. There is global legitimacy now. And through our beautiful Canada, we need to change our paradigm and work from east to west instead of north-south. And our official languages is an important asset, and we need to do it while ensuring economic development. I know there are scars from the past, but I think there are also opportunities. So my first question related to this is for Mr. Campo-Fredano. People talk about Quebec, but the fact that this federal act applies to all of Canada, and the fact that there are a lot of businesses that provide services across Canada, Is this not something positive for Quebec? I'm talking about putting more pressure to telecoms and banks. And you're doing it for all of Canada. There's an opportunity there. Is that not one of the strengths of this law for Quebec? Yes, of course. As I've already told your colleagues, the will is there. It sends good signals. When the federal government, even though it is somewhat following the Quebec government, it still sends a good signal to do this. And as I said in my opening remarks, through my experience in my law firm, and of course when you do business with chartered banks, of course there's a strong English presence when it comes to services provided or simply the documentation. So I think that this would send a strong signal. And there's also the aspect about communications and advertisement through social media. Of course, English is very attractive, and this goes beyond Montreal because internet does not have borders. This new legislation can have an impact on private businesses. I like to think that there's still a lot of work to do in Montreal and in Laval, especially when it comes to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So I just want to keep talking about young people, because I think that when it comes to the pride of French, we are experiencing this paradigm shift. So how we can be proud and shamelessly how we can express ourselves in French instead of being afraid to express ourselves in French. Ms. Arsenault, you said that you agree with the regulations. So I want to talk about implementation. So in your province and in the rest of Canada, if we want to say, look, this is a lever, this is good for you, instead of saying, please do this, because that's the kind of attitude that we want to change. And us liberals, we really want to ensure that this strength is there. And I'm sure that my colleagues in front of me agree with me as well. So to have that strength, what do we need to do when it comes to implementing these regulations so that young people can benefit from this through jobs? So here's an example. My daughter's graduating class, they were around 30. They graduated in 2022. There were 30 of them in St. John's. And back then, only 5 students still spoke French when they graduated. So we say that we're bilingual, but children, young people, after finishing school, as well as young people who are in French immersion, they do not have the opportunity to work and to use French. So you know what happens? People lose their confidence after that. They lose it. I have a nephew who is in Ottawa. His mother is Francophone, but he speaks in English. I understand we have to change that. So the Act seeks to create jobs, to create that pride. If we want to accelerate the implementation of this regulation so people feel like speaking French, do you have any ideas? Sorry, you are out of time, so please a quick answer. You need to have the ability to teach young people in French so that they can properly express themselves, especially in a place where English is in a majority setting. And I know that there is a lack of resources, so you need to invest in that. Thank you very much, Ms. Chanette. Now, Mr. Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. So for Ms. Arsenault-Sluter, this is what I find strange. In Quebec, the bill applies, or the act applies to businesses with 25 employees and above. Yet outside of Quebec, in New Brunswick, it's only for businesses with more than 100 employees. maybe it should be at least businesses with more than 50 employees. You need to start somewhere. And of course, we want to see all employees be able to work in English and French. There are laws that protect us, but sometimes you need to ensure that they truly protect us. Now, you need to start somewhere. And I think that this is already something positive for us. I have a question for Mr. Chaisson. Do you know how many businesses with fewer than 100 employees who will not be subject to this act? A fair amount. If I was an MP, I would be more worried about the inconsistencies between Part 4 and 7 of the Act. For example, your colleague, Mr. Godin, brought this up. Sometimes you can have a school in a region. They can apply for a passport in French down the road because there's a federal government building, but then they cannot do it. They cannot open a bank account. But this applies to the entirety of New Brunswick. In other places in Quebec, it's set by potential indicators. And if there are no bilingual regions, then it might be. We're still talking about Section 23 of the Charter. So as Francophones, as those who defend the language, one Francophone means that the demand is justified. So we need to seriously look at how we address the inconsistencies between Part 4 and the implementation of these regulations. It may create issues. Your time is up. Thank you. Over to Mr. Bélanger, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will piggyback on Ms. Chenette's question. I think that New Brunswick is very similar to my region, the north of Ontario, especially the eastern parts of it. And I wonder if this new act, which should protect and promote French, does the act create an environment where we can grow as a language? Or is this just an environment that is there to serve French-speaking people in that region? In my case, we see that French is declining in the affected regions. And if there is a decline in those regions, and if they are currently designated as strong Francophone presence regions, what will happen once they are no longer designated as such? And here's my other question. To promote French, I think us Francophones, we have a responsibility as well. I'm guilty of this. To be able to promote French, you need to be able to live and to work in French, but it's too easy to be assimilated. Take the example of a bank. It should provide services in both official languages. If I go to a counter and I ask for a service in French, they go find somewhere else to serve me. So it's just easier for me to speak English. Even as a small business person, you pick up the phone and you prefer speaking in English instead of French. Is there something else that the government should do? I'm not very optimistic, and that's why I'm asking you the question. You need to start at the source. You need to start with our children, our young children. You need to have schools. It's not everywhere in New Brunswick where there are French schools. And what you're saying is true. And I myself, I'm guilty of this. We're tired of always asking. But with promotion, once we see results, I think there will be this domino effect. For so long, we thought it did not exist. And we need to do a lot of work. Because it's true that around the world, French is an asset. Especially when you take into account what Canada is going through and what everyone else is going through. You really need to invest and start with our children so they can go to school in French. Because I can spend day and night talking about assimilation with you. It's a whole generation thing. I see it day and night. And assimilation will continue until the fact that there will no longer be any post-secondary education in French. And then to stop that, we need to have more people in businesses in management in French to continue things. We've been talking about C32 since 2021, and now we're in 2023, there was C13, and we're still talking about today. This is not great progress. And the law will come into place only 2 years after Quebec. And I think in 2 years with AI, businesses will be able to do that instead of having people to respect laws. What do you think about that? Of course, there are concerns. I agree with you. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We've been doing that work for a long time, and we need to keep doing that work. We must not give up. But there's investments that need to be made at the federal level to improve things, to implement things, and they need to face consequences. Are there things that us as Francophones can do to improve and to use the tools that we have? You have 20 seconds left. Here's an example. In St. John's, during the municipal elections, the election will take place on May 11th. And amongst the candidates, I asked one of them, you do not have posters in French. They did not even think about that. And then that candidate actually created posters in French and posted them across St. John's. And that's the first in history. So it's our responsibility as Francophones to ask for this and to know our rights. We've been doing this for 52 years and we will keep doing it. Thank you, Ms. Bélanger. Now, Ms. Minga Hailey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses who are here today. My questions, Mr. Campo-Fredano, will be to you to begin with. In your view, does the federal government have full jurisdiction to impose linguistic requirements on federally regulated private sector businesses without encroaching on areas of provincial jurisdiction? I think that area wasn't strictly set out when the jurisdictions were divided in the 1867 Act. And it was never settled constitutionally before the courts, but federal relations or labor relations in federally regulated companies are subject to the Labor Code. So we could assume that the federal government does have jurisdiction over language. That could be a shared jurisdiction. I'd come back to the work you're doing with these draft regulations. So yes, I think the federal government can legislate in that area. Thank you. My second question to you is this. Can the federal legislation strengthen the Canadian language system, or does it open the door to tensions between Canada and Quebec? There can be different views of federalism, but, well, there can be different visions of federalism, a more centralizing vision, and a view that historically that provided for independent regimes with less encroachment. That's a more classical or traditional view of federalism. So could this legislation benefit Canadian federalism? Well, based on the principle that there are two official languages in Canada and that both languages need to be protected in the same manner, although it is French that needs it more, I don't think there'd be a negative impact on Canadian federalism coming from this statute that promotes the use of French in federally regulated businesses. I think it would even lead to a better balance, because English is naturally strong given the numbers of people who speak it. So I don't think it would really pose a problem with federalism. Ms. Arsenault-Sluyter, I have a question for you. How can the government ensure that the benefits of the legislation are equitably distributed among Acadian regions? How can the federal government ensure that the benefits of the statute would be equally distributed among Acadian regions, including rural regions? Well, it would apply to all businesses in the province that were federally regulated. But as I was saying, our rural regions are emptying out. There's an exodus, and in the north, these are Acadian regions. So if we have this legislation that will make it possible for people to work in French and to stay home, that's a plus for everybody. As for the Anglophone parts of the province, it'll be even more helpful because those businesses will be genuinely bilingual. And if they have to deal with Europe and Asia, I think it's a win-win for everybody. Thank you. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing here today. And again, on behalf of the committee, Ms. Arsenault-Sluyter, thank you for all the work you've done over the years, and we do hope to see you at some point. Our next hour, colleagues, will be in camera, so we'll suspend for a few moments to go into camera.